We primarily work at Tinsley House and Brook House immigration removal centres at Gatwick. We also provide services at the Cedars family pre-departure accommodation. Well, detained immigrants, so people who end up in the detention centres. If you were to categorise those people, it's largely people who've claimed asylum, also foreign national ex-prisoners, so people who served a prison sentence are now going through deportation proceedings, so end up in removal centres. Other people who have either breached or overstayed their visas. We support them emotionally, and we support them practically. So the emotional side is a lot of people find it very difficult being put into detention. A lot of people have nobody really they can turn to, nobody visits them. So we have around 60 to 70 volunteer visitors. We will allocate one volunteer to one detainee, and then that volunteer will visit that person every week for however long they're in detention. The practical side of it, we do various things, everything from giving people clothes and credit for them to top up their phones with, more sort of casework where we either help them to find lawyers if they don't have lawyers, or we can liaise with their lawyers on their behalf. We make referrals to other organisations as well. For example, the Red Cross organisation called Medical Justice, who send in independent doctors to do medical reports for some detainees. Detainees bid, who run bail applications for detainees. There's a very general concern we have about the use of detention. We feel that the UK is alone in Europe in detaining people indefinitely. So there is no time limit on detention. People can be held, well, indefinitely. So we've certainly supported people who've been held in the centres for years. What you often find is that people who've detained very long term, their mental health deteriorates significantly, and physical health and mental health. So the treatment of vulnerable people within the system concerns us greatly. The detention of torture survivors, people with mental health problems, people with physical health problems. We feel that people are detained unnecessarily. They're quite often detained unlawfully. There we have a great deal of concern about the changes in legal provision, the legal aid cuts that have been implemented by the coalition government have that a lot of people who previously were able to access free legal advice and representation now can no longer do so, even though they may have quite a strong case to stay here. They now have to present that case themselves, which can be particularly problematic for immigrants, as often English is their second language. They don't understand the system that's holding them. It's extremely complex and ever changing, and it's very, very difficult. Overall, not very successful. It's been very difficult. The political climate in this country has been moving further to the right, further to a hardening of immigration policy. Particularly as in the last few years when we've had the recession and the financial crisis. Often what happens is we look for people to blame, and an obvious target is people who aren't from this country. So it's been politically very difficult for people to stand up for the rights of migrants. So they're really people who I think are very much the bottom of the ladder in our society anyway. So there's very little public sympathy. Generally, if you pick up most tabloid newspapers, then you're going to find, most days you'll find some story about an asylum seeker or an ex-prisoner, as if they have no rights. So it's extremely difficult for us to get the political will. Saying that, there have been some victories, particularly in the area of the detention of children. They wouldn't usually be there for weeks, but for years, but they would certainly be there for weeks and sometimes months, and that was just terrible because the damage done to children being detained was very well documented and very severe. So the coalition government did, after a great deal of lobbying work before the last election around child detention, the coalition government did bring in a promise to end child detention. Now it's not completely happened, but it's certainly been hugely reduced both in number and now a time limit on it. The new Immigration Act that's just been passed through Parliament is going to severely curtail the rights of immigrants, not just people in detention, but immigrants more widely, even further. And and encountered very little opposition really going through. It passed through the Parliament very quickly with very little scrutiny and very little opposition. The main message for us is to get past the labels, like thinking of people as an immigrant, an asylum seeker, an ex-prisoner. As soon as you put a label on somebody, then that's it. You've sort of frozen them and you've given them an identity, and you no longer. It's easy not to see that person as a person anymore. Certainly, the work that we do, we go in to see people and we listen to them, not as any of those things, but as a person. And it just that you have a completely different experience when you do that. So when you hear what people have actually been through, the stories, people's lives, it's just you get a completely different view on the whole topic of immigration. I think we are all just people. We just where you were born and where you happen to be brought up is completely out of your control. That's really the message to me. It's just treat everybody as a person.